So, how do you make a game like Grow Garden 2 and Roblox Studio? And this time, let's focus on the player balance and how we can increment it, like when selling stolen items or when selling your own crops. And I plan to make this in a similar way like I did with my premium framework. So, let's switch right to Roblox Studio before the thieves come out. So we're inside Roblox Studio now, and this is just meant to be an example. There are those so-called int values here, which we can use to modify this value attribute holding an integer from the server and reading it from the clients, which for simple systems like this one is the perfect fit to store the player's balance. So let's create one of those each time a new player joins. So for instance, inside our plots script here, we could use the player service to connect to the so-called player edit event and add this int value we just discussed, like so, parented to the new player with the name balance. And if you like, you can also give it a default value like 10. And now we can find it here where we want it. Great. And in my case, there is this cylinder hitbox we use to, sell and remove stolen items to keep it fair for all players, and you don't need to do it this way. And this is the code we essentially connect to its touch function. And instead of just destroying the stolen item, we can now increment the player's balance by 1, for instance. You can also make this depend on the type of plant, for instance. And now let's test this in multiplayer testing, like server and clients like this time around. And now when stealing another player's carrot, bring it into here. Great, let's have a look. And there you have it. Player 2's balance being incremented to, in this case, 11 in total. Perfect. But in the final Roblox player, this thing won't be visible. So let's say we also want to add a HUD where players can read their balance essentially. And we can do this by adding a new screen GUI to started UI. So it's there by default and its graphical user interface gets projected directly onto the screen. Let's rename this to HUD, but you don't have to. And set screen insets to none. So you don't have this margin because of Roblox's built-in UI. Now we're good to go to add a new text label to it. Balance label, for instance. Make its background transparent. That takes color to green, most likely. If it helps you envisage it, you can also give it a default text like so, because we will be modifying this attribute from code in a minute. Let's say I want to make it bold, slightly bigger, have the text aligned to the left on the X, make it orient at the bottom left, like so, like at its bottom left, and then set its relative position on the Y to 100%, like this, but perhaps give it an absolute offset. Let's say 10 pixels. Oh, but let's go with -10 here. Perfect. I feel like you can also give it a slight stroke by setting this to 0. So I guess this does the trick for me. Now we can add a new local script to start a character script. So it's being run every time the character respawns, and call this thing HUD. And now I can get access to it like this. Set it once at the very start and update it each time the value attribute changes. So we essentially connect this code to it then, being run every time that happens. There you go. And the reason why we use player GUI here instead of started GUI is because all started GUI is essentially getting copy pasted into this object here. And the reason why we have value in here is again because this value attribute is the actual data holder, if you will. What happens if we switch to the server and change this to 100? There you go. So it's getting updated correctly. Perfect. And what happens if we call off our pizza guy? Like by setting this to 0. Okay, so it still says 100 because this is parented below the player, like this abstract player object rather than the character. But the HUD still replicates the changes, which means the setup here we went with was successful. Perfect. But in Grow Garden 2 and also the original, you can also sell your crops using this simplistic UI. So let's quickly have a look at how we can add that thing as well. So this time around we want to add a billboard UI. The interface is floating in the air, I guess. Call it, for instance, cell GUI. In my case, I'm using this 3D model from the toolbox. So I guess I want to rename this front part to front so I can access it via code in a minute. And set it as the so-called adornee for this billboard GUI. There you have it. Let's say I also want to enable always on top this time. Give it a slight stats offset. You can also disable the light influence, like this. And max distance should be fine this way, since we'll be using a proximity prompt in order to hide it again anyway in a minute. We can add a new text label again, set its background color to black, and make it mostly transparent, like so. Well, let's say like 0.7, set text color 3 to 1, to white, so I guess 1 depending on whom you ask, and set its text to I want to sell this, for instance. You can also make it bigger again, And I think the other options I want to skip this time around, but as always you can find them here with my framework. But thinking about it, we need to make sure to use a text button here instead of a text label, so we can detect mouse clicks or triggers in general. Call it so this button for instance. And now we can just copy paste the text and make those other adjustments real quick, like so. And now let's keep this hidden for now by setting the cell GUI's enabled attribute to false for a minute. And now when it comes to my front part, I want to add a proximity prompt to it. So let's say I want to change its action text to open shop, but keep the hold duration at 0 and the key code and so on. Because now it will show up like this, and I only need to connect code again to this triggered event here. And now you can do this in your HUD script again, or create a new local script called cell shop or whatever, and get access to this cell GUI this time. Again located below player GUI. Get access to the proximity prompt. Now make sure those names here and the hierarchy in general aligns with what you have here. Now each time I trigger it, I just set the cell GUI's enabled attribute back to true. Once the prompt becomes hidden again, like when the distance to the proximity prompt becomes too high, I set it to disabled again if you will. Let's try this real quick. Okay, good. And this appears to be working as well. Great. Now how do we detect mouse clicks on this cell this button? Well, in our case we can get access to the cell this button like this, and then connect new code to like a new function, a new code snippet to its activated event, which would work on both at PC and mobile. Let's test this. Okay. But instead of doing this locally, I want to ask the server whether I'm allowed essentially to sell my current item. You know, I can create a new remote event below replicated storage, so both server and client can access it, and the client can fire it in order to run code on the server, which will then perform some security checks and perform an action if applicable. And you can access it like this and fire it on the server, like so. And now I can access it the same way on the server and connect you to the event, like this. I need to be careful because the player instance will be transmitted or passed automatically even though I don't put it in here when firing or invoking a remote events or functions from client to server. And then I can get access to the player character and the tool they might be holding, which I can tell because if so it is located below the player's character. So this straight in whatever model we just had in here. If my player character doesn't hold anything, I can cancel here, and I can also check whether it has a plant ID or not, and cancel if it doesn't, because we likely don't want to allow players to sell their shovel or seeds, for instance. Or actually it's because I think I've been using the plant ID for seeds particularly, so let's switch this to value. And after this we can destroy the item, like the crop I'm holding, and increment my balance by whatever value we got. You can also perform additional security checks here, like whether the player character is close enough to the shop in the first place, and so on. But let's keep it simple for now for educational purposes. In my case, this section here creates a new carrot tool/item when harvesting. So conversely, if I want to go with this approach, I need to make sure to set an attribute called value in the first place. And let's say I just wanted to set it to 1, for instance. So it's the same regardless of whether you steal it or sell it naturally in my case. Let's try this. So nothing happening when no tool is equipped. Nothing happening when I'm holding a carrot seed either. Perfect. Okay, so let's harvest this carrot. And let's see what happens now. There you go. Awesome. So does this still work after dying? I can still sell it, however. So I will be replacing this workspace reference with server storage now, so it doesn't briefly get dropped. Alright. And I think this with this series I won't be going over like leaderboards and so on, daily rewards, but you can still find them in my template and also touch on them briefly in our Grow Garden 1 game series. You can find it at the top right. So now with this in place, next time let's wrap up this series by having a look at restocking shop systems like the one used in Grow Garden 2 or a simplified version. And I think then we're good to go to wrap this thing up and maybe figure out how we can publish our game then, respectively. Yeah, feel free to let me know if you have any questions or you need help with any of this, and have a nice one.